on this computer. Hi, we're here again this evening with Janine. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or after 3. It's like 3:15 in the afternoon in Wisconsin, and it's 11:15 p.m. here in Jerusalem. And Janine has so kindly agreed to come back and talk to us and finish the story that she started last week, her very extraordinary story, actually, of a Jewish journey. First of all, growing up in a Jewish home, observing certain Jewish rituals, and then discovering at the age of 17, I think, that she wasn't really Jewish at all. And so she had to then kind of embark on this journey of conversion to Judaism, after which she became really completely disenchanted and wasn't really particularly observant for very much of her life. And then recently again, I say recently, in the last maybe 20 years or so she's been observant for quite a while now. In the last few decades here, she again was inspired to become observant. And so we're getting part 2 of her story today. We're going to hear how her life has changed since she became observant, the standouts for her in living an observant Jewish life. So without further ado, I am going to unpin myself and go back to gallery view. It's a whole performance here on Zoom, and say, welcome, Janine. Thank you so much. It is so great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. And that it's really wonderful to be here with you. And I would much rather be with you in Jerusalem too. But hey, this is okay. Short of that, this is okay too.
Great. Thank you. So I am going to ask you a few questions because, as I said last week, we're kind of learning the Animamin, the 13 principles of Jewish faith. That's what we're working through on the YouTube channel. And so I will ask you a few questions about that and how those principles play out in your life. But before we get into the specific questions, I would just like to hear a little bit about what the major changes have been in your life since you became observant. And, you know, what you would say, and we touched on this last week, what you would say to someone who's struggling with, becoming observant. Because we hear all kinds of things about how oppressive it is for a woman and all this kind of stuff. So now you've been living joyfully as an observant woman. Walk us through how your life has changed.
Okay, so you're with the way you post a question, or like the context, that takes me a little bit into a certain area or a certain thing. And when I think of the way my life has changed most, it's really to know. I would say I now know that whatever appears on the surface as hard, potentially, or as completely crazy, even like makes no sense, outdated, old-fashioned, whatever thing that might come up when you first come face to face with observant Judaism, I now know that there's always a deeper reason and beauty in whatever it is that may seem. So that I would say completely changed my approach to learning about Judaism, to keep up my learning, to keep up kind of doing more of that. And sometimes I have to pull back a little bit. I have a tendency to kind of jump in with both feet. And then, sometimes it becomes like, I committed to too much. Okay, I got to go down a bit. And that also led me on a journey of introspection, becoming more honest with myself in the experience. I think being much more humble to submitting my own will to that of a mentor, having a mentor to begin with, which I think I would highly, highly recommend. It should be someone that you trust, someone who is a role model in Jewish observance for you, someone who is not afraid to be honest with you, and you are going to be willing to take, even if it's sometimes honest but maybe uncomfortable feedback from, and to do what they're recommending for you. It's not just another opinion, the mentor's opinion. And I think those all together really have a way of setting you up for success in Jewish life. In my experience, it had. In any case, almost started speaking Swiss German for a second there. Not that anybody could understand really well, but so I think that would be probably what helped me the most. And then, I remember one in particular, like there was one day where I went to speak with my mentor. And I said, I am going to want to start keeping Shabbos and I want to start keeping kosher at the same time. And it wasn't such a gradual thing. And then he was like, slow down. Okay, now he's a Chabad rabbi. He would have been, you would imagine he would be totally like over the moon. That's amazing to hear. The first thing, and I see it on his face as I'm speaking to him, he's like, whoa, 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 slow down. And I was like, what? Like, what's now not good enough, right? But he said, you have to go, take baby steps. Take baby steps, meaning like, yes, that's okay, but now go slow. As you're learning about these are both huge commitments, huge changes. So let it settle. Go slow. Give yourself time. Be kind to yourself. This isn't like all in and then, because the more you're learning, you're realizing how little you still understand and how you do. He was so wise in that, and he was so strong in that advice at the time, which I think was like worth gold, really.
Fantastic. And so you at some point you felt inspired to, okay, I want to do everything. I want to keep all the mitzvahs. I want to just jump in now and be completely 100% observant. And your mentor said, like, okay, just take it easy. It's a step
all the mitzvahs. It was Shabbos and it was kosher.
Well, so, for a woman,
but those are the big ones. Those are two of the really big ones. Yes, 100%. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I would say, it wasn't so enthusiastic in some way. It was a lot more. We had at that point with my son and I, he was about 8. We had been walking to shul 4.5 miles each way for about 2 years by now. No, not yet. We had been driving to shul, right? So we were like, okay, we're doing Friday nights. We had a Shabbos playlist at that time because we liked still listening to music, but we also wanted to really get closer. So we would have a Shabbos playlist, and I wouldn't listen to any of that music except for on Shabbos, and it was all kind of Shabbos music. Obviously, anybody observant would be like, that's ridiculous completely, but it was part of the process. I would invite people. I didn't have a kosher kitchen yet, so I could only invite people who also didn't keep kosher, but still kind of were, in the community or friends who were Jewish, etc. So we would do that. And then it became suddenly my son at the time, he was 9, and he was like, but Mom, like, we're not supposed to drive to shul. And I'm like, yeah, I know that too. And he's like, so we should walk. And I'm like, you know how far it is? It's like 4.5 miles one way. And he's like, yeah, but we can do it. And I'm like, okay, if you think you can do it, you want to do it. It's like, let me do it, because he alternates between me and his dad. Let me do it one Shabbos and see how it goes. Like, are there sidewalks? Like, what's the, danger zones getting there between where we lived and shul at the time? And then we'll see. And it was fine. And after that, we started walking to shul on Shabbos. So that it was almost like at some point, this came from him, this desire to want to walk. And then I would say the kosher together at the same time. It was more like, when you are in a relationship with someone you really love and admire, and you value them, you respect them, then there comes a point where you say, okay, this is going to be on my terms a bit. Okay, so here's what I need. This is the space I need. This is how I do things. And then you learn suddenly that actually the other person would prefer certain things to be done a little differently. You didn't know that before necessarily, but as you learn it, suddenly it becomes a matter of like, so how much is it just like about what you like? And at what point are you willing to maybe do something, to change something in the way that you liked it, just because to show the other person that you really actually want to be with them. And it felt like that within my heart to say, almost like Hashem was telling me, like, you know what about now? What do you think? Maybe time to try the kosher thing and actually get serious with Shabbos, no more playlists and things like that. And I could feel that, I could feel almost a challenge, the request, but it was in such a, actually I'm getting goosebumps as I'm thinking about that moment, because it was like such a, on the one hand, a loving within me kind of a request coming up, that I really wouldn't have dared to just dismiss at that time where I was in my journey. So it wasn't so much enthusiasm, it was more like we're kind of getting closer to each other, stepping into relationship. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, because what you're really talking about is, what I'm hearing is that you were cultivating this very intimate relationship with Hashem, really. And
Yes.
yeah, that, which is really fabulous. I mean, as you know, I have this book on prayer, and it's all about the relationship with Hashem. And that's really what Judaism finally is all about. I mean,
Yes.
we,
Yes.
in the month of Elul, I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me kind of idea. There's this idea that we
Yes.
got married to Hashem
Yes.
at Mount Sinai in the giving of the Torah and in us receiving it. Phenomenal. So it wasn't really that you were being told, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. There wasn't an authority standing over you. And what I think is fascinating is that even when you said to your rabbi, okay, I'm going to start keeping kosher, I am going to now take on observing Shabbat completely, he, being sensitive to where you were and what was required in your own process, said, okay, let's baby steps. It's like your baby comes to you and says, I want to enter a marathon. You say, okay, well, let's
Yes.
learn to walk. How about that?
Yes. Yes, that's a great metaphor.
Fascinating. And so there was this, because I mean, and I think this is really great because nobody has really talked about it. There was this inner relationship that was being built, which also, interestingly enough to me, was coming out of the mouth of your son saying, hey, that is really quite wonderful. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Carry on. That's really awesome.
No, you didn't at all interrupt me. I think that was pretty much, how I got to become much more observant. And ever since then, he went on a journey, and now he is going through this phase of distance. I don't want to have
he's 15 years old. We expect
17
that.
Almost.
Well,
Yes,
17,
yes.
Really? No, and 17
another few weeks.
Oh my word, time really is flying. Wow. Okay, so now, and what changes, because I love the fact that you began to talk about, building a relationship. So what changes did you notice in your relationship with other people as your quest, or as your urge for observance grew? Did you notice any changes in how you related to people?
So I think I mentioned this in the last conversation. So I would say, when I am not in a great place, mentally speaking, and I mean by that, like, just, we all have certain things that happen, we respond in a certain way, nothing really severe. But small things, like somebody says something and you didn't like what they're saying or how they said it or who said it or when they said it. And so my tendency had been to sort of like go into pleasing mode. So to appease people. So to kind of go out of my way to make it good again. If I perceived anything vaguely as like maybe they could have taken offense or they would have liked something different from me, then I would bend over backwards if I could to actually please them. What changed after that was like there were certain elements I could no longer please and actually keep Shabbos with. Okay. So when my boss would call me at Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock and say, hey, can we have a chat after I've asked them all week that I need to have a chat about something. And now it was them cleaning up their stuff before they wanted to go out on the weekend. I had to say in the wintertime, I'm sorry, you get like 30 minutes. And then we're done, hard done. No more until, after, if you like Sunday, I'd be happy to, but not now anymore because of Shabbos. And being in a very secular world or working in a very secular world, actually my manager at the time was Jewish too. She is Jewish still, but she's no longer my manager. But anyways, it was really leading to much more clarity and assertiveness, which was the beginning of really recovering from one of my biggest weaknesses and becoming like much more into, I'm calling it into me. Who am I without those layers of feeling I should be somebody or not? I would say. And that then had an impact on the relationship because as a pleaser, people get used to you saying yes. So some people really felt like, what do you mean? So now you're becoming orthodox. I was like, yeah, guys, call it whatever you want, but I'm no longer taking calls on Shabbos if that's what you mean, right? And I'm no longer going to be able to join team dinners. I'll come and I'll have some water. And at the time I was like, okay, we used to have to go to conferences and sometimes there wasn't a Chabad, sometimes there was, and then I would go to Chabad and everybody else would go have the big party and whatever. And I'd be there somewhere out in the city, like having my Shabbos meal and then go back and, Motzei Shabbos. But it really led to people having to reassess I felt like some of them really had to readjust or reassess how they related to me. In some cases, initially it was like, well, if that's what she wants to do, then there's no more need of her to even showing up to these conferences. And somebody else hearing that, also being Jewish, but non-observant, suddenly took offense to that comment, which wasn't even to me. I mean, it was to me, but they were like, wait a second, that's not right. Now they started standing up for me. I didn't even ask them and said, that's not right. I want to help you make that happen. I want to I want to help you actually. And it was like, well, I guess, okay, fine. So if she has to sit out, like 6 hours during the most important part of the conference, then so be it. And that kind of, so I think it led to a readjustment in the relationships. And for some people, even my sisters, it led to more distance. With others. And then I gained friends like you and others here in the community where in so many ways I share much, much more than even with my sisters. And yet it's just a very different thing, right? So it's like the blood relationship and then nothing else we have in common really, but we do have our parents in common.
Right.
But there is never going to be a happy Hanukkah from their side. It's always going to be Merry Christmas. And I'm like, but we all grew up like together, like
right. So they kind of went the Christian route and you went the Jewish route. That's interesting.
Totally different. Yes.
Wow. Well, I mean, I think that is so interesting how other Jews, even if they are not observant, become inspired to speak up for a Jew. I mean, it's interesting because I think it's the founder of Chabad that said that, at his core, every Jew really wants to be observant. Every Jew really wants to live according
Yes.
to Torah and Mitzvot. And every Jew really loves Hashem at his core. It doesn't even matter if he is, proclaiming himself to be an atheist or whatever. And I think your little story has just really demonstrated that.
That's true. Yeah.
It's really quite fascinating. And that happens more and more, and we see that all the time, And so there's that Pintel yid, and that
Yes.
every Jew has that just springs into action at exactly the right time. Fascinating. Now, so you began by baby steps, and how do you think you've moved into complete observance, or do you still see yourself kind of taking it one day at a time? How is that for you now?
No, so it is definitely like not a non-negotiable for me at this point. I think there's a few areas like when I'm out and about with my son. So let's say I'm traveling with him. And it was interesting for a long time, touched on this, kosher was hard, really hard. It's still, of any of the things, kosher is still the biggest challenge for me. But then I realized, actually just this summer when we went for this trip with him to Switzerland, and there was really, where we went, there was nowhere near a Chabad as such. So yeah, you can, tuna cans and crackers are available anywhere. Kosher, you could bring it with you. If you really, really want to, you could have made it happen, and I would have completely alienated him. Because a big part of what he wanted to experience is like this place, this different culture. He's like, just get me out of the Midwest, Mom. I just want to, just different. He really kind of is at the same stage I was when I was his age, where I wanted to see the world. I wanted to interact with different cultures. I wanted to experience different climates, different everything. And I really struggled. A month leading up to it, I was like, davening to Hashem's like, what am I gonna do? How do I do it? Do I stick with it and trust that you're going to kind of mold his heart in a way that he understands, that he's respectful of it? Am I completely gonna leave it for this 3 weeks and not do anything just to kind of like really go with him? Am I gonna do sort of the vegan thing? Like, it's really not the right way, and I feel guilty about this, and maybe I shouldn't have done the trip, and blah blah blah.
Wow.
It was a really big struggle. And about 2 days before we left, there was suddenly sort of a moment of clarity for me within. And again, this is not something that I would say anybody else should do, but for me at the time, it was like, the most important mitzvah for you during this journey is going to be ve'ahavta recha kamocha. So do to your neighbor as you would like to, it to be done to you. That was one. And I'm like, what does that mean? But what does that mean in this situation? Right? And so it's like, okay, it means for me to be really, really present. That means to me that I'm not going to go do things that I want, such as going to try kosher restaurants that might be sort of kind of nearby. That maybe even means to not go to places that I wanted to go to, but really make this about him. So he can experience what actually like somebody else doing things for you looks like. On the one hand, and then for me to be honest with myself about what is true in which moment. Where am I gonna want to eat? I'm not gonna want to eat in certain places. I don't care how long I haven't eaten. And then there's certain places where I might be okay, even though it is not kosher, but there is an element of care and attention to detail and intention to the, it's going to sound counterintuitive, but I'm going to say it anyway, to the holy, even though it's not Jewish even, but to something really, really precious and noble. So sometimes that might be okay. And then I'm not going to eat meat, right? So I'm going to have fish, and I'm going to have vegetables, and I'm going to have fruit, and I'm not going to be over on desserts, and not because they're not kosher, but because it's probably not. Anyway, just kind of being really present, really careful. and honest about in the moment what's really true versus what do I love. Oh my God, I would love a certain sausage, right? They have like really the best certain sausages in Switzerland. Anyway,
Right.
like I would love that, but I was like, well, okay. And what was interesting is the shift for me was like, actually, it was a struggle not to eat kosher on this trip, whereas I expected it to be the different way. I expected it to be the other way around. But other than that, yeah, there's no negotiation. I'm not going to go out or want to go out to restaurants or, you know, stuff, or it's hard to, oh, I wish I could. No, not really anymore.
Right. So the desire has been taken from you. And I think that this is really, it's a crucial, for me anyway, this is what I found in the kind of transformation process, that there comes a point where the desire, and I can speak to it through, say, Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program. And there was a time many, many years ago, decades ago, when I was struggling with alcohol, and alcohol was really interfering with the kind of life I wanted to lead. And what happened after the first meeting I went to was what I call a spontaneous remission, where the desire to drink alcohol was completely gone. It was taken from me. So there was no struggle. I wasn't what they call white knuckling it, trying to force myself not to drink. It just wasn't there. It was a non-issue. And it sounds to me very much like that's what you're saying, that, in terms of the laws of kashrut or keeping kosher, it's not a conversation that's going on in your mind anymore. You are at a place where it's just the most natural thing for you to do, which is quite extraordinary. And I really do look at that as miraculous. I know that other people have, other definitions of the miracle, but it's clearly divine. And I thought it was just really beautiful that there was this communication, this inner communication that was going on with Hashem. Just really, I think your story demonstrates it very, very beautifully. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now the next thing I wanted to touch on, just listening to what you were talking about, and you talked about relationships with people. And so how is it, for instance, for people in the Jewish community that, are friends of yours or acquaintances of yours, and if they invite you to their home, let's say, does that present a problem in terms of eating? Like, how do you negotiate being with Jews who are not observant? Are those relationships still carrying on as usual, or have any changes really occurred in those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what I would say with the non-Jews, right? So in some cases, it is clear, and then we are meeting here, or we're meeting down, like near Chicago, where there is restaurants. Now we have a few or a couple of them in Milwaukee too. So we can go there for like a lunch or something like that, or a dinner. And whenever I have some friends in the Chicago area from previous day work, and so whenever I go down there, I would usually let them know, and we go to one of the kosher restaurants, and they just know that's what it is, right? I would go to a coffee somewhere non-kosher with them. That's fine. So there is a little bit of give and take, and for them it doesn't really matter. They feel like, oh, she came to coffee with me there. Okay, fine. But eating, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to have anything like, so, and they're not going to get into the details so much. And for others, it's more like a whatever, you do your thing. And I don't think anybody though really has taken offense to like, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore because of that. Everybody's been really respectful, because I think in our days, there's so many people who have, the ones who do keep keto, the other ones do the intermittent fasting, the other ones do gluten-free, or only gluten-free, or vegan, or this. And it's like, okay, so now you're adding kosher to that. It's like, okay, so that's your thing. Fine. Am I going to, because of that, do an extra effort to accommodate for you? No, that's usually not the case. So then it's just up to me, and I've learned to eat before I go to a place where I know others will eat, and I might just join them for, like company. But that's almost never happening anymore. That used to, when I was really like actively in business, still engaged every day, would go into the office and things like that. Then yes, the team dinners was a really common thing. Celebrations was a really common thing. So I was like, okay, I would do my thing and I would eat something before. So I wasn't hungry and I wasn't tempted then too much. But it was a process. And sometimes I did. I just like, I'm having a salad and I'm having salmon with the salad, for example. And that was fine.
Right. And so now you've really had comparison, because you've had an adult life of not being observant, and now an adult life of being observant. Which do you prefer and why? I mean, the answer is obvious as to which you prefer, but
is that a serious question?
that is, I mean, because I interestingly enough, I met a very, very observant woman who just the other day said to me, you know what, I'm done with Judaism. I'm done with it. I'm done with it. And she just didn't want to do anything anymore. And I think it spoke to deeper kind of psychological issues that she had. But in her mind, Judaism had become the source of all her problems. And I mean, that is a way of looking, if you look at it as kind of arduous and things you have to get through. I mean, it's obvious that your life is based on a much more intimate and a closer relationship with Hashem, which is, what it's really all about. But just, if you could take a step back and look at how you were then and how you are now as adults, like, where do you think the major changes have really occurred kind of psychologically for you as a person?
I'd have to go back to what I said a little bit ago, where it has really helped me and shaped me to be, I would say, so far, the best version of who I am now.
Nice.
Right.
Nice.
So really, who am I supposed to be? Who am I meant to be as a human being in this world? I don't think I've ever been closer to that than I am now. And also, and that's still a process, that's actually still, there's still, work is not a word I necessarily like associated with that, but the continued discovery and practice of loving who I am again. And that, by the way, was never the case before either. So I think ever since, we have this thing when we are little children and we're not aware of those things, we just live. And some of us, depending on what age and our experiences, we leave that behind faster. But then it comes adulthood, and I don't think I've ever really loved who I was, because there was so much conflict within me about who I wanted to be, who then I thought others wanted me to be. And then I tried to be more like that, and that wasn't authentic. And then what does it even mean being authentic? So can I just be, whether I dislike something strongly and I just give free rein to my mouth, to my tongue, I can be very witty and very sharp, but I can also really hurt people with that if I'm not careful. I used to be. Sometimes it doesn't come out very often, but it's certain moments, right? There's like where I knew that was not proper. It was not kosher for sure. And I would say, then it became, well, you're bad. Then there's our inner judgment, like, you're never going to make this. You're never going to measure up. You're never going to be really orthodox. I mean, look at your rebbitzins and your rabbis. You're never going to be like that. And feeling like I should. And yet feeling like this huge resistance. I'm never going to want to wear what they're wearing like that. I don't want to have a shake. I just don't. I still am there in some of those areas. But that's okay. And I've learned to love who I am regardless of those things, and not let those judgments that are really all in my head Nobody else ever says anything. Nobody ever told me, yo, you should consider having a sheitel. Maybe another very enthusiastic, community member was like, well, have you thought about that? And I'd be like, yes. And I decided it's not for me at this time in my life. Does that mean never? No, it just means not now. 3 years ago, I was telling actually my Rebbitzin when she asked me, because I'm also looking for a shidduch. So she asked me, she had somebody in mind, and she asked me, so would you mind like a full
If I just may stop you for 2 seconds. So sheitel is a wig, and a shidduch is like a match.
Yes. Yes, it's a match.
I don't know who we have watching, so it's just
perfect.
Thank you for non-English words.
To that.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but carry on.
So she asked me, would you be willing to consider a full-on Chabad rabbi, and I said, yeah, absolutely. He just needs to know that I'm not going to give up my genes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was like at that point, right? And then came Rosh Hashanah same year, and it suddenly was like similar to the kashrus and similar to the keeping Shabbos, where one thing that bothered me with almost all dates I had been going on, and it's not like there were that many, but like when I did, was this instant infatuation with my body. Okay, this instant complimenting me on my body in a way that felt more sexual and more like suggestive. Then it's like, focus on me. Like, I'm not my body only, like my body. Yeah, okay, fine. But not now, not in the beginning. It felt like disrespectful actually in some ways. And so the question suddenly arose in me as Rosh Hashanah approached and Elul and all of that. And I was like, so given the genes and all of that, fine, you can keep it, but would you want people to remember you for your body? I mean, you say that you don't, but then you dress like you do. And I was like, oh crap, I'm not consistent. You're right. And away went all the jeans within like less than a week. And all of the pants, right? And I was like, and it felt a little bit the same way, like with kashrus, like, oh my God, now, not like, oh, nice, now I have an excuse to buy clothes. It's like, oh, my whole wardrobe doesn't work without those pants anymore. Right. Tunics and long, it was like a system. And now the system doesn't work, so I have to come up with a new system. And that took me a good 2 years to actually really find what's working for me now. What do I love? What's consistent with what I love, not what somebody else has. And that I knew was not going to work for me. I'm like, no, I don't like that. I don't like the style. So it took some time, but it's a journey. So I'm not going to ever say like, I'm never, ever going to wear a wig. Maybe someday, who knows? For now, no, thank you.
Wow, that's fascinating. I have to just continue to thank you for your candor and your honesty. You're so open about how it was and how what the struggles were like. And I just think that people resonate with that because they can relate to, the same things happening for them. And it's always so refreshing to hear someone so open and so honest. I just really, truly appreciate that. So now, was there any more you wanted to add before I kind of switch gears a little bit and start talking about the 13 principles of Jewish faith? Now, right. So when you first went through the conversion process, and that was back here in Israel, was there emphasis put on the 13 principles of Jewish faith as far as your learning was concerned? Do you remember?
I think it wasn't that directly heads on, like this is what it is. And again, right, this has been a long time ago. So we're talking 91 when I went through that process and the learning for about 9 months. And it was the most focus was on like, kashrus. I remember kashrus a lot around that. I remember about Erev Tafshilin, Erev period. I remember it was a lot about the home and keeping a kosher home. It was a lot about family purity, It was about keeping Shabbos. Those were really the main, I would say, those were really the main things. I don't remember anything specific around these are the 13 principles and let's go through them and you got to learn, and then also asking. I don't.
Interesting. And have you had a chance since then, since the 90s, to look at them ever?
Well, yeah, I have, but I couldn't tell you what they are off the top of my head. I'm embarrassed to say. We're like, we had a class.
This is so good because that's in a way, that's the reason I'm doing them. I mean, I'm doing them mainly for me, but it's just, I think that they're a good yardstick. I mean, not in terms of, okay, can I recite them, but what do I really believe as a Jew? You know,
Yes.
I mean, when you take away all the trimmings and the trappings and the rituals, what do I really believe as a Jew? And how is that? And of course, every Jew believes this, whether they think they do or not. And my curiosity is, how front and center is it in your life? I mean, it's clearly front and center in your life because you talk about your, incredibly deep and very sensitive and sensitized relationship with Hashem. So just, for giggles, I'll just tell you what the second principle, we're working with the second principle right now, and I'm just going to pull up the book. And I'm just going to, do you want me to share it on the screen or do you want me to just read it to you?
You can just read it to me.
I can read it to you. Okay, so I'm just going to open the book again. Let's try and do that here. And we're at the second principle. I'll just tell you what the second principle says. And I won't go through everything that Rambam has to say about it because that's all in the Mishnah Torah. So I believe with perfect faith that God is one. There is no unity that is in any way like his. He alone is our God. He was, he is, and he will be. And in the Yigdal, which I believe occurs, I think at Mincha or maybe Ma'ariv, in the Siddur, that principle is written as he is one, no unity is like his, he is hidden, his unity has no end. So we're really kind of at the core, in my mind, of the Shema, all right?
Yes, yes.
Of the unity of Hashem. And I'm just curious how that has impacted your thoughts. Like when you first, for instance, learned the Shema, how did you feel about it? How does that idea of the unity of Hashem show up in your daily life, in your conversations, and just in your beliefs? If you were to describe your belief as a Jew, what part does that play? How does that translate for you? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does. 100%. Thank you. So this could be a really long conversation all by itself. So I'm going to try to kind of go like summarize first, and then you can see if we want to go a little deeper. I would say in the beginning, it's just like, this is the foundational prayer for any Jew. So you just do it. It kind of sort of makes sense. I didn't really bring up too many questions for me up front. I would recite it. Now, today, these days, it orients me every single day in a way that sort of this whole notion of Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, but perceived not by us on a daily basis, but just knowing that that's who he is, and everything is within, through him. Everything only exists in that oneness. Because our perception of it, my perception, I'm going to talk about myself. So my perception is different, right? My perception is no. There is the people in the office, and there is the people in the neighbors who are always having to something to maybe say that it's not so great. And then there's the people who are always counter. And then there is the politicians. Don't even get me started with politicians. I mean, not really. I'm not that into it, but you could, right? And then there is everything that's happening in Israel of all the places in Israel, and how completely unone we are there, it seemingly is just mind-blowing right now. And to say the prayer every day in the morning and then at night again, at least, and then it's just, okay, Hashem is one, and then is coming down to Elokeinu, is like the different ways of us relating to this oneness, and then bringing it back up, but Hashem is one. And I actually just recently had this question to my rabbi. I'm like, why do we have to say the one at the end? I mean, isn't it obvious? Because we use Hashem, the definition of that name is one. By definition, that's like the highest, that's it. So why do we have to add the echad, the one, as like being explicit at the end? Honestly, I don't remember exactly the answer, other than it's important maybe for us to remember, because up until now, I didn't understand. I mean, not that long ago, I didn't really understand the differences between Hashem, the name of Hashem versus the name Elohim, right? The different energies and the different perceptions and the way we relate to this energy in a different way here in our world. But there's so many other worlds that we can't perceive, that we can't reach, we can't see. So to remind us that Hashem, the end, is one, and everything is just one. So to me, it really brings sort of this, it's like a recalibration, morning, recalibration, evening, to not lose hope in what I see throughout the day and what I hear in the news, but to know there's nothing outside of you. So this all must have a good purpose. And my job is to do my job and to trust you, because you're not making any mistakes. And that's also part of the work, right? Because it's like, it's easy. Still, for me, it's easy to think, oh, I have to work harder. I have to do more hours. And then there's going to be more income. And then there is more this. And then there is more that. No. Yes, I have to partner. I got to do my job, but there's comes a point where I can believe in what I do more than I believe and trust in Hashem. And that's actually then idolatry, as we learned. And that blew my mind when I learned that. I was like, wait, what? Right. So there is so much encapsulated in that. It's like a nuclear prayer. Right. To recalibrate and to really remember, this is the truth. This is it. There's nothing else. If it comes down to it, that's it.
Right. That is quite fantastic. Oh, that completely answers my question. Not only does it answer my question, it demonstrates how beautifully it impacts every area of your life without you not knowing specifically what the second principle of the 13 principles are.
That's right.
And yet it's, and this is the whole point, and this is why we do this, to really, I mean, part of what we try to demonstrate is that, you know, there isn't Hashem and then there's the Jew, you know, it's just one, there's not your life and then there's God. It's all one and the same. There's not your life, and then there's Judaism. And this is why observance is so critical, because it really, it all melds into one. You know, a Jew is someone who does this, someone who believes this, someone, you know, it's really quite extraordinary how your life is life itself. It's the life of Hashem, and that you live that consciously. Then that's what I find so fascinating, because I don't know any other, you know, religious people or people of other religions or other faiths who are so conscious of their relationship with Hashem and what it is they're supposed to do here. I mean, it's a 24/7 occupation. Like, being a Jew is the work. Do you know what I mean? It's and I think everything you've just said really completely demonstrates that. And so that, and my takeaway from everything you've said is that, you know, you don't have a separate life from Judaism, that being observant, first of all, you have found your own, it's almost like a process of self-actualization where you then live the life that you were intended to live, and you do so consciously. And I think that that is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm so thankful to you, and all the areas that you've opened up for us, and your candor and your humility, and just and the joy that you extend also. I really, really thank you so much, and I'm so happy to have you, and I hope that you will also consider at some point down the road that we call on you to come and talk to us about some other aspects of Judaism. Now that we've got your story told, we can now continue the story, but in other ways, in anything that
Not really.
interests you that you want to share. Please always feel free to come back and talk to us.
I would absolutely would love that too. And thank you so much, Shoshana, for the questions. I want to just kind of give credit a little bit for that, what you just said about like this conscious living. That's really all to the credit of my parents. May they rest in peace. They are no longer with us. And that's how they lived. That's all I remember, how they lived all their life. So I don't think I would be here and an observant Jew, even though they chose not to halachically convert. But I know that's exactly, that's who I learned it from.
Right.
And maybe also why I wanted to distance myself, because I was very similar to my son in that regard. Like at the time, just like, I just don't want anything religious anymore for a while. I just want to see what the world has to offer outside of that. It felt very constricted. It felt very rigid for a while. It felt very like, you can't, and you're always in very really going to be wrong, and things like that. So anyway, but I wanted to just give credit where credit was due with that. Thank you so much for asking the questions in the way you have. It just led me to some really beautiful places on my journey that I haven't been in for quite some time. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so glad. And may your parents' wonderful neshamas have an aliyah. And I look forward to seeing you again really soon.
I do too. One way or the other.
I will for sure talk before Rosh Hashanah, but if we don't, in any event, Shabbos comes up tomorrow. So Shabbat Shalom. And I'll be in touch before the holidays. I love you forever. Bye, Janine.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Shoshana. Bye.